On Wednesday morning, July 22nd, 2026, more than 3 gigawatts of electricity demand disappeared from the largest power grid in the United States. In a matter of moments, a transmission line in Northern Virginia went out of service. A cluster of data centers automatically disconnected and switched to backup power. That single move pulled roughly 3% of PJM's total demand off the grid at that instance. The voltage disturbance was detected as far away as Chicago. Nothing bad happened. PJM said grid reliability was not affected. Dominion Energy had things back to normal within minutes. But think about that for a minute. A handful of data centers built to run AI workloads are now large enough and concentrated enough that when they twitch, you can feel it 500 miles away on the electrical grid. That is a story I've been researching for the past 6 months. And it's not a story about software. This is not a story about MacroMashup disappearing for 6 months. It's the opposite. We've been saying a lot, just not here. And now it's time to bring that work back into the podcast. That's why I'm calling this Season 2. The focus is AI infrastructure and the grid underneath it. Season 1 looked at how energy policy shaped capital markets and how capital markets shaped energy policy right back. And that still matters. But Season 2 is narrower and I think more urgent. Can the physical grid keep up with what AI is asking of it? After 6 months of researching that question, I think most people are watching the wrong layer of the AI story. And today I want to explain why. If you'd followed AI at all over the last couple of years, every conversation starts in the same place, well, almost the same place after will A destroy us all. What is the latest model? Who is winning? What benchmark was beaten this week? Was it ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Kimi? Take your pick. And those are reasonable questions. But after months of talking to developers, utility executives, and infrastructure investors, I found myself asking a different question. What does this actually run on? It's not the cloud. Physically, what is underneath your prompt? And here is one number that reframes the whole discussion. In 2023, US data centers consumed 176 terawatt hours of electricity. And that was about 4.4% of all electricity used in the country. The Department of Energy estimates that number could reach somewhere between 325 and 580 terawatts by 2028. At the high end, data center electricity consumption would more than triple in 5 years. And this is not only a US story. Globally, data center electricity demand grew 17% in 2025. Total electricity demand grew only 3%. Demand from AI-specific facilities rose 50% in 1 year. The International Energy Agency, IEA, projects total data center electricity could reach roughly 950 terawatt hours by 2030. But the number that stopped me was the power density. AI server power density increased 11-fold between 2020 and 2025, and it could rise another 4-fold by 2027. At that point, one advanced server rack, roughly the size of a refrigerator, could draw as much peak power as 65 households. 65 households in a box the size of a fridge. The head of the IEA said it plainly. There is no AI without energy. And that's not a slogan. It is the hard binding constraint. For decades, software scaled without anyone thinking about power plants. Nobody watched Netflix add 10 million subscribers and said, oh, we better start planning a new substation. That was just the design of the cloud. The cloud didn't eliminate infrastructure. It just transferred responsibility for it. Software companies could rent computing capacity without negotiating for land, transformers, substations, cooling systems, or transmission access. Someone else handled all of that in the background. Infrastructure began to feel available on demand. AI is exposing the limits of that arrangement. A proposed AI campus today is not simply a larger version of a traditional data center. At 500 megawatts or a full gigawatt, which, by the way, is about the size of Central Park, you're scaling more than software. You're scaling generation, transmission, substations, cooling, water, land, air permits, and utility agreements all at once. And this is the mismatch that drives the whole episode. Models can improve in months. The infrastructure underneath them takes years. Power plants take years to build. Transmission lines take years to permit and construct. Substations don't materialize overnight. That gap between model speed and grid speed is beginning to determine where AI can be built, how quickly projects can come online, and which capacity announcements are believable. Let me make this concrete. Microsoft added nearly 1 gigawatt of new data center in a single quarter, and then did it again in the following quarter, 2 gigawatts in 6 months. The company also brought a massive facility called Fairwater online 6 weeks ahead of schedule. It's in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. The campus covers 315 acres. It includes 1.2 million square feet of buildings, 120 miles of underground medium voltage cable that exists just to move power around the site. Even after adding all of that capacity, Microsoft says demand still exceeds supply and expects to remain constrained through at least the end of 2026. The Microsoft CFO, Amy Hood, called their largest sites multi-year deliveries. Before processors can be installed, she said the company needs power and land and facilities available. Think about that sentence. The CFO of one of the largest software companies in the world is speaking like a utility executive. Land, power, facilities, not chips, not models. Now look at the grid operators. PJM recently raised its projection for annual summer peak demand to 3.6% over the next decade. In 2021, that same forecast was 0.3%, an entire order of magnitude increase in the growth rate. Data centers are the main reason. And PJM also pulled back some near-term projections after applying tougher standards to proposed megaloads. It gave more weight to projects with firm commitments and construction underway, and discounted projects that were still speculative. So two things are happening at once. Real demand is growing far faster than anyone forecast 5 years ago, and grid operators are also becoming more skeptical about which announced demand will actually appear. A software company can rewrite its roadmap in 1 quarter. A utility is planning assets meant to operate for decades, and these two time frames are not running on the same schedule. That mismatch is becoming the bottleneck. And once you see that mismatch, another implication becomes clear. The companies that secure power early are not only ahead on construction, they may gain an advantage that no model release can undo. Alphabet agreed to acquire Intersect Power for $4.7 billion in cash plus assumed debt. Intersect is not a chip company. It's not a software company. It owns a portfolio of energy and data center projects already under development. Sundar Pichai described the strategy this way: new power generation in lockstep with new data center load. That's not a company shopping for an electricity contract. It's a company deciding to build the power plant and the data center together on one timeline, so neither one waits for the other. The first project is already under construction in Haskell County, Texas, and Meta is taking a similar approach in Richland Parish, Louisiana. Its Hyperion campus is expected to cost around $27 billion when the buildings and long-lived infrastructure are included. So Meta structured it as a joint venture with private credit firm Blue Owl Capital, because a project that large needs outside capital committed for years, not one earnings cycle, for years. And here's why this matters competitively. A competitor can buy the same chips, it can hire your researchers, it can raise capital, it can't force a utility to finish a transmission upgrade faster. It can't shorten an equipment queue by releasing a better model. Power access is becoming part of the competitive position itself. Even geography is changing. Dominion Energy says projects under 50 megawatts near existing infrastructure may still take 1 to 2 years to connect. Above 50 megawatts, a new substation and transmission extension may be required. The map of good AI real estate is increasingly drawn by power delivery timelines, not only fiber routes or tax incentives. Now, this is where the numbers get wild. If you read only the press releases, you might think Texas alone is about to build enough AI infrastructure to power a small continent. By April of 2026, ERCOT had received 445.8 gigawatts of large load applications through 2033. And that's more than 5 times ERCOT's all-time system peak demand. I know because I was involved in a project that submitted into that process. But look at what sits behind that headline number. 321 gigawatts had not submitted studies to ERCOT. Another 93.7 gigawatts were still under review. Only 22 gigawatts had met the planning requirements. And when you reach what is real, energized, operating, and actually drawing power, the number is 5.9 gigawatts. Another 3.2 gigawatts had been approved to energize, but were not yet running. So, out of 445.8 gigawatts of announced demand, roughly 9 gigawatts is real, or close to it. That doesn't mean all the other requests are fake. Some are serious projects. I've seen some of them, and they're still moving through the process. Some companies are holding multiple site options while they arrange financing. Some requests are speculative. ERCOT effectively acknowledged this problem when it adopted a new batch study framework for projects of 75 megawatts or more. The old system could not reliably distinguish a serious commitment from a placeholder. So ERCOT expects only about 100 gigawatts of the roughly 450 gigawatt total to qualify for the first 2 tiers of real consideration. And this is a distinction investors and operators need to understand. A megawatt in a press release is not the same as a megawatt attached to a completed utility study. That is not the same as a firm commitment. And that is not the same as a megawatt that is energized and serving a paying customer. In this industry, the biggest number in the headline is often the least useful one. So where does this leave us? The cloud trained an entire generation of software companies to expect infrastructure on demand. Add users, ship features, enter new markets. The servers were simply there. AI is testing whether that assumption survives. And so far, the answer looks like not entirely. I will keep watching the models, everyone will, but I'm also watching a different set of questions. Do regions that secure power, land, and transmission early begin to pull away from those that don't? Does the gap between announced gigawatts and energized gigawatts begin to close? Do companies willing to become infrastructure developers, not only software developers, gain an advantage that better code can't erase? Because I keep coming back to one sentence. It's the sentence that started this 6-month research project. Software never needed new power plants. AI might. Whether the grid can keep pace with the models is a story I think most people are missing. That's why I've been building something called the AI Grid Report. Not because I have it all figured out, honestly, it's the opposite. I think we're at the beginning of one of the largest infrastructure build-outs in decades. I want to understand it while it's happening, not after the fact. And if any of this is interesting to you, I would love to have you along for that journey.